Terence McKenna, the late psychedelic bard, came up with a kind of good quote for this. The fact that DMT induces these kind of entity experiences so frequently is something to be remarked upon. He says, you want contact, you want alien intelligences, all you gotta do is inhale. By the time you breathe out, you get elves. Everybody does. It's this kind of famous quote, you get elves, everybody does. Well, not quite everybody. According to Rick Strassman's more kind of thorough research, under laboratory controlled conditions, 50% of high-dose participants had this kind of invisible worlds phenomena where they would encounter alien beings of some description. So that's kind of fairly good reliability that you can administer a substance in a certain dosage and half your participants will have an encounter experience. That's scientific repeatability. One thing that was key that Rick Strassman noted in his experiences of his participants was that it had a relationship to this alien abduction phenomena as well. Not only were people having kind of probes inserted in bizarre places, they were also being kind of operated on in this kind of classic alien abduction type scenario. Things inserted into them, the presence of kind of little alien-like entities, often kind of elfin or insectoid, such as mantises. And mantises became a kind of growing a motif in the alien abduction literature, kind of separately to the DMT literature actually at this time. There was an article about the presence of mantises, praying mantises in the alien abduction cases in the 1990s, which is called the greying mantises because they kind of appeared so often in people's abduction phenomena. But this was kind of separate to the DMT literature at this time, at least we think so. So we find a bit of a concordance there between this kind of motif of the praying mantis. Terence McKenna suggested that the great psychedelic bard, we are actually alienated, we're so alienated that the self must disguise itself as an extraterrestrial in order not to alarm us with the truly bizarre dimensions that it encompasses. When we can love the alien, then we will have begun to heal the psychic discontinuity that plagues us. But he also said a lot of other things. He also suggested that the elves were kind of hyperdimensional entities and they were kind of sentient and existed in their own right as well. It's interesting, two of my colleagues naively had praying mantis encounters, for instance, one of them on DMT for the first time. And I assume naively because I don't think they knew very much about the literature at that time. And somebody else also had a kind of full-blown praying mantis brain operation on ayahuasca as well. So what is this motif all about? I'll tell you maybe a little bit about my own experiences with elves, because I believe it has to be kind of experiential as well, this research. So I had, of course, the DMT experiences. Unless you see that's okay.
Can we have the light?
You can, yeah. I won't be scared. In my first DMT experiences, not knowing very much about the kind of DMT literature, this is my very first experience. I was kind of very surprised to have this experience of these, what I can only describe as elves in some way, very small kind of humanoid characters about this big, kind of sat at the top of my body, although I didn't actually have a body as such. I'm in a kind of space of kind of light and energy, but you know, my kind of concept of the body, there was these kind of small elves sat on top of me, you know, shoving in all this light into what I would call my solar plexus region, which kind of, when I came back, kind of took on a new kind of significance for it. That's why they call it a solar plexus, of course, that's where they shove the light into. But then I was kind of quite intrigued to then discover all this kind of literature about DMT elves. And I had a few more kind of elf encounters on DMT. They take on a very cartoon-like, clownish form. They shapeshift as well. They never really keep still. They move around. You can't really pin them down. Later experiences on I had one experience on ayahuasca, which was quite a surprise. Ayahuasca, this is ayahuasca here being used by the Shivaites Indians in Ecuador or Peru. And ayahuasca is a kind of jungle decoction, the main ingredient of which is DMT. And if you drink this, you have like a 6-hour DMT experience. And during one of my experiences, I was sat there in a tent, and several elves appeared in front of me. And, you know, previous to this, I had kind of closed eye experiences where these kind of elves in some other dimension were kind of running around doing things. But here it was for the first time, I'm sitting there in a tent looking at other people across from me in the tent, and then these elves come into view in between us, which was kind of quite alarming. So alarming, in fact, I kind of turned away because I couldn't quite cope with them being there because it was such an ontological challenge. So, of course, elves being elves, they kind of ran around in front of me. I feel view, I had to keep looking away and then running back down. I really didn't know what to make of it there. And though I'd read all about them and I'd even experienced them, my eyes closed, this was a real ontological challenge. But it needn't always be DMT that is the trigger for these elven experiences. Of course, people have spontaneous elf encounters, we know that from the literature, but also in other psychoactive substances. When I was out in Brazil last year doing some research, we had the fortune of going to a tobacco ceremony with the Ataguarani indigenous people, and it was supposedly a tobacco ceremony, but things kind of got very weird, and I wasn't quite sure why. But on the minibus coming back, there was a little old woman in the seat in front of me, kind of peering over the top of the seats, and she must have looked about 300 years old. She had a kind of smile which extended all the way back to here, and very, very dark eyes, in fact just jet black eyes, and she had this ancient wizened face, and she was kind of peering over the top of the chair, just smiling at me. And I was like, who is that old woman? Why does she keep smiling at me? I don't remember her coming on the minibus with us to go and visit the Indians. I thought she'd some kind of extra random who got on the minibus with us and come along. Despite the fact she was 300 years old, this all looked completely normal to me. It wasn't until the next day I was kind of communicating with some of my colleagues who'd also been at this tobacco ceremony. And she said, well, yeah, my friend and myself and my friend saw that. Did you see that little man running around the fire in the Indian's hut? And I was like, no, I don't remember seeing him. And the two of them saw us, so we have some kind of correlation, at least, of this multiple witnesses to this event. And so she drew me a picture of what it was, and there's her, looking a bit distressed, and there's the little man. And when she showed me the picture of the little man, I suddenly remembered this little old woman on the bus. I was like, oh right, I didn't see him, but I saw a little woman look rather like her. Anyway, I kind of eventually concluded that the next day, when I was trying to give a presentation at this conference and I couldn't actually read my lecture notes, that we'd been kind of slipped some datura, which is probably the only explanation for it. At least that was my evaluation of the situation. So it needn't always be DMT substances. In fact, drugs aren't necessary for elves at all. They can do occur spontaneously. But it may be that an altered state of consciousness itself is necessary, and some people are more prone to that, to get into dissociative states. And it may be that because we all have DMT in our brain, when we go into these spontaneous states of altered consciousness, that we're activating our own DMT in our brain. So it could be the neurochemical substrate for these spontaneous experiences. So some final comments then, I'll kind of wrap this up. Rick Strassman has tried to kind of suggest that DMT is a mediator in kind of all kind of spontaneous mystical and paranormal experiences, be they kind of out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences in particular, or alien abduction experiences, but also sleep paralysis and things like that as well. So we have this kind of death, alien, elf, entity, paranormal, mystical experience complex, which kind of is grouped around this DMT ayahuasca experience. Also, there's elements of a kind of shamanic, like spontaneous shamanic initiation to the whole near-death alien abduction complex. But it's easy to kind of melt it down into one kind of uber experience, but I think there are certain nuances and differences in these different phenomena which really need to be addressed and unpacked. The aliens themselves may actually be elves, but the aliens are more intraterrestrial than extraterrestrial, or perhaps even trans-terrestrial. They're not actually outside, they appear to be something, inside's the wrong term as well, but a kind of an experience that occurs in consciousness. And as a scientist then, I try to take an experimental approach to this research, which is pretty tricky, to say the least. So it probably also makes sense to take a kind of mystical approach as well. The late, great scientist, Dr. Albert Hoffman, said that any scientist who is not a mystic is not a scientist. So the best approach would probably be a kind of combination of both, and I'll finish off with J.C. Lilly's famous dictum here as a kind of light in the dark. In the province of the mind, whatever you believe to be real either is real or becomes real within certain parameters. Those parameters are to be tested experimentally and experientially, and when so found, those parameters turn out to be more beliefs to be transcended. In the province of the mind, there are no limitations. He then, a few years later, added a caveat to that because he had a few near-death experiences, and he said, but in the province of the body, there are very certain limitations. Okay, so I'll leave it there. Thank you.
David, once again, an excellent speaker who's given us 2 minutes. So, if you're prepared to take a couple of questions before the main panel, any questions?
I really enjoyed your presentation.